Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Welcome to the Fly With Us podcast. This podcast is bringing the art of conversation, self love, self care, mental health care and protection, life lessons, love lessons, and everything in between. Today, we're going to continue with part three of our hip hop series, and we're going to discuss the women in hip hop. I'm Lady Bounce.
And I am Picket Fence.
Sir Pickett, you have the mindfulness minute for this week. Let's go.
Maturity, one discovers, has everything to do with accepting of not knowing. Second part to that is the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is right now. Word up. Now the
Word
reason
up.
reason I picked those to go with our discussion today is because we're talking about women and hip hop and their place in hip hop and the history of women in hip hop and the current women and current men. A lot of people don't know the history and the true culture of hip hop looking at today's hip hop. Specifically, we're talking about women today, and we'll get deep into the show. But that's why I picked those two quotes right there to acknowledge that I think that a lot of people don't have a history of our culture and that it's not too late to learn the history of our culture, man or woman.
I like that. I like that. So we have a special guest. We have some other guests that are going to be joining us a little bit later in the show. But Sir Pickett, you are more familiar with our guests. Can you introduce our guest to us?
Yes, joining us today is a lifelong friend of mine. We grew up in the hood together. She is a student and teacher of metaphysics like myself, Miss Chekesha Bell, aka the Pretty Priestess, who is a big hip hop fan, and that's why I especially wanted you on the show today. You are a fan, and I think that when we talk about hip hop, we can't just talk about the artists. We have to talk about the people who are die-hard hip hop fans. So thank you for joining us today.
No problem, no question. And I appreciate you guys for including me in this discussion. So peace to y'all.
Word up. So let's jump into it, Lady Bounce. Let's get right into it.
Oh, I thought you had the first question. I guess I got the first question. Okay,
Yeah.
I guess the first thing I got to ask, because we're all hip hop fans, Miss Shakesha, when did you fall in love with hip hop?
I fell in love with hip hop in the early 80s. I had the luxury of having an older sister who was into a lot of the hip hop that I wasn't really feeling initially, where we're talking about like the Sugar Hill Gang and a lot of the earlier hip hop that came out. But as it started progressing, when LL Cool J, when KRS-One, and all of those individuals that came along in the mid 80s started coming along, that's when it really started to speak to me and touch my heart. And I think that the vibration of the sound was a little different at that time, and so it spoke to me a little differently.
Word up. So we've talked about it before with me. I'll give my answer again as I always do. I think that I fell in love with hip hop before I came here. I think that I was conceived in '73, around August of '73 when it's recognized as the first hip hop party. I think I heard those and felt those frequencies and had to enter a portal to come here. I was born in '74, the year hip hop got its name, so it's always been in me and it is encoded in my DNA.
Yeah.
So, what say you, Lady Bounce?
Okay, so I fell in love with hip hop in the early, 80s. I was a 78 baby. So soon as I, heard this new sound, and then of course, coming from the kind of family I came from, it was like it was rebellious at first because my mom was like, "Well, what is that you listening to? And what's that rap that ain't no real music." So of course, like any other kid, when your parents tell you no, that makes you gravitate to it more. So then I just started trying to, find all the music that I could, and then growing up in a musical family, having a dad who was a DJ, being a DJ myself, we had places that we would go and we would get discounts, on tapes and like maxi singles. So I would pick up stuff and be like, yeah, this is great. And my mom would always be like, we couldn't listen to rap music on Sunday because that was the Lord's day. So we were like sneaking and listening to it, and having, older siblings. I had an older brother and an older sister, and then some older half sisters, and they were into the club scene. So they were coming home and talking about different music and stuff. So kind of like Chekesha, I had like a hodgepodge. I had stuff I picked up on my own, stuff that my siblings had brought home, and of course I had, friends who was always like, "Hey, have you heard the new this?" And I'm like, "No, I haven't, because we over here, we don't really get to listen to rap music like that." So, I had a whole little mixture of it, but I fell in love with it when it seemed like it was something that was speaking to me like no other music could. Like I felt like they got us, rebellious kind of teenagers, or to stick it to the man, or saying no just because you can kind of thing. Like it felt like that.
Yeah, I definitely think it was in some instances stick it to the man type of thing. I mean, you're talking about rebirthing or re-recognizing of our culture that has been stolen and taken from us and robbed of us, and we had to reemerge and recreate our own culture, and hip hop is one of those things that tools that we use to do that. You're taking nothing and making a real big something. So yeah, definitely.
Absolutely.
So as we're talking about, we've been doing in this series, talking about hip hop itself. But, one of the questions that I left off our last episode, which I want both of you to speak to, is there a difference between rap and hip hop? And if so, what is the difference?
For me, my understanding is rap was supposed to be at the time rhythm and poetry. And then I learned about it being a higher infinite power healing our people, which was an acronym for hip hop. And depending upon the delivery of the message, it could be either or. It can be a tool that's used for healing, and it can also be a tool that's used for a soundtrack to do something that's the complete opposite. So this is, in my perspective, it can be absolutely what you make it. Now, it doesn't mean that we throw away a lot of the stuff that has the negativity in it, because it has its place. Some of those vibrations are good for certain things, working out for one thing or the other, But in my experience, hip hop has been a tool for healing on every level. Even when we go back into the times of the early 90s, when the whole gangster rap culture was out and about and available, and we had the earlier the women rappers that were coming out that were speaking more about women's empowerment, and then the dynamic kind of shifted a little bit, where it was the street woman that was being highlighted at the time, and you could get something from the vibration on both of those types of frequencies. You can take something and be empowered with it. So with that, it being a rhythm and a poetry is still in itself a higher infinite power, which heals our people, regardless of how it's being delivered. It's just, I guess, the frequency that you're on at the time when the message is being delivered, and how you're receiving it and what you do with it.
I like
that. Yeah, I definitely agree. Word up. For me, rap is a part of hip hop, but hip hop encompasses more than just the rapping. If we talk about the four basic elements, we're talking about graffiti, we're talking about DJing, we're talking about breaking, along with the rapping. So those four basic elements are the combination of hip hop. Rap is just one element of that. So I wouldn't say that rap is separate from hip hop. I would say rap is in hip hop.
Mm-hmm.
Word up. And joining us, Dan Tres Omi, welcome to the Fly With Us podcast. Thanks for joining us today. We were just breaking down first, when did you fall in love with hip hop, like most hip hop conversations start? And secondly, is there a difference between rap and hip hop? You can go ahead with both of those questions. Take it away.
My story actually is funny because my kids finally got a chance to meet my uncle. My story begins when I was a kid. I was supposed to like sing and dance merengue. I was a merenguero. My folks are from the Dominican Republic, and I remember my uncle was staying with us, and one of my mom's friends was like feeling him, and he was a player, so like it was like, can I say hit it and quit it? He was like hit it and quit it, and then like he like ghosted her, so she would come to the house and be like, where is he? So she noticed that he really liked me and my brother, so she kind of like figured if I develop a relationship with them two, maybe it'll bring them around. So she introduced us to the Sugar Hill Gang, and ever since then I was open. So that's my story of how I fell in love with hip hop. It was shout out to my uncle. So and then there is a difference between rap and hip hop, and I think like when we think about rap, we think about like commercial rap, and then hip hop is like you were saying, it's a culture. It has several elements in it. There's a dance element. There's a talking element. There's a musical element. And there's an artistic element that you went over so eloquently. So yeah, I agree with you on that.
Word up. Let's dive deep, Lady Bounce. Let's go ahead.
Okay, so I mean, we're gonna dive into it. So we're
Yes.
talking women in hip hop today. Do we have a place in hip hop? I mean, the short answer, of course, is yes. But because it is a male-dominated field, it is a man's world. Should we really be a part of this? Who wants to go first?
I'll go first. I'll say definitely yes. So women should be a part of it. Yes, women are a part of it. Yes, and commercially is a male-dominated thing. But when you look at all of the elements of hip hop, women might shine in more aspects of it that aren't talked about. Because when we talk about hip hop, we usually only talk about the music aspect of the rap part of it. But women have always, in my opinion, dominated in the fashion industry. Women may not dominate, but women are very great in the art industry. And in the last few years, you see more women DJs. You're a DJ yourself, Lady Bounce. So yes, women are a part of it. Definitely. That would be my answer. And I would like to say that I think that we should stop saying female MCs like a lot of us when we have these conversations, because a lot of these female MCs are better than most of the male MCs you hear on the radio nowadays.
I absolutely agree with you on that. When we start talking about the female MCs and then the way that women have been projected within the media during this time, and as I was talking about before on how we had that whole Queen Latifah, MC Light type of vibe where it was more linked to women's empowerment, and then we shifted into like the whole Little Kim, Foxy Brown thing when it was more of the street woman type of thing. And so many people thought because they were on one side of the spectrum that the other side of the spectrum was one to completely do away with. And there's always going to be a duality in any type of avenue or any type of music or any type of genre that we're dealing with. But it seems to me like where women are concerned, it starts to look a little bit different. So when women are starting to give their true and their most authentic expression, they're being looked at or cast away as a throwaway. And even if I'm not in agreement with the approach or with the words that's being said, this is a woman at the end of the day that's speaking her real and her raw and her authentic truth. And this is who she is as an individual. And so when we throw away those individuals that put out the songs like the Meg Thee Stallion songs and the Cardi B song where everybody was completely outraged. Like, I'm not trying to play that tune for the grandkids when they come around. I think it was outrageous to pull it on at the family reunion. You know what I'm saying? But I like the song. Am I rocking it? It's a time and place for everything. And so what we have to do where it comes to women in hip hop is get into a more inclusive and an expansive place where we can respect the duality in nature. Number one, that doesn't mean because she's highly sexual, that makes her a throwaway. And it doesn't mean because she is presenting a little bit more masculine energy, that there's nothing feminine and soft to her. But what ends up happening so many times with women in hip hop is they get pegged into this category where the expectation for them is to kind of muffle and stifle their expression. And I think that the more we start to expand, the more we start to encourage women to give their most authentic expression, this is when we're going to see a blossoming of some true healing and authenticity in the hip hop scene as far as women are concerned. That's all.
Or
If I could jump in, like, and Picket Fence was right. Women have been here since the beginning. When you talk about Cindy Campbell, Kool Herc's older sister, and she's the one that had the birthday party that he DJ'd in. So if she didn't have that birthday party, we probably wouldn't be in this room speaking about it. All our lives would have a different trajectory if she didn't have that party. But my issue is just the fact that a couple of things. We don't see that many women in leadership position, which is intentional, right? It's a male-dominated culture, it's a male-dominated industry. So we don't see a lot of women in leadership position, but in all of the genres and all of the, whether we're talking about b-boying, we're talking about writing, whether we're talking about MCing or DJing, like we don't see a lot of women in leadership positions, like being in charge of stuff. Because it's one thing to be represented, but it's also another thing to actually be in charge. Another thing that I noticed about the music is two things about the music. The industry kind of plays it like Hollywood and black men, right? There can only be one leading black man in Hollywood at one given time, right? So it can only be one for like 10 years and then we get another one. Same thing with women. You can only have, in hip hop, you can only have one woman MC who's dominating the field, and you got to kind of like wait for her shine to kind of like die out for you to bring somebody else in. So another thing that I have an issue with is that, and I think you were alluding to this earlier, the sister was saying about right before me, I don't see a lot of variety when it comes to the women who are in hip hop music. I can only get, it's kind of like if I want to listen to gangster rap, whatever that is, I can listen to gangster rap. If I want to listen to boom bap, I can listen to boom bap. If I want to listen to nerd rap, I can listen to nerd rap. And I can just pull it out of any time I turn the radio on. But I don't get a chance to hear women be as diverse as the men, which is, again, intentional. It's an industry thing, right? The industry wants to sell a particular type of woman. So you have, and I like Cardi B, I like Saweetie and all of them, but that's like they all kind of like rap the same thing. And I would like to see more variety of women. Even years ago, like, you just had one type of women MC who did one type of thing. And if I wanted to find more, I had to go to the underground outlets for that.
I agree. So we just had a guest join us, Doc Rock. Welcome to the show. Who is my good friend? She used to live in Dayton. She's from Baltimore originally, so they get a lot of the music first because they're right there on that eastern seaboard, New York, New Jersey. She also works with children, so she has a unique place and a job, such as I do, to have to listen to some of this new music that these kids listen to, so we can have a frame of reference so that we can reach them. And of course, she is a female, so she's totally equipped and a huge hip-hop fan. So Doc Rock, welcome to the show. And we're talking about, the question is, do women have a place in hip-hop?
Thank you, first of all. Sorry for being late. And I do think women have a place in hip-hop. We have a place in any space that a man can occupy. I think our voice is a lot different. And I kind of co-sign what the two speakers ahead of me said, that we get pigeonholed into we have to be a certain way. Because I've been a fan for so long, I've kind of seen how the genre has gone from, well, since I'm an 80s baby. So I've seen how it's gone from like Queen Latifah, Bahamadia, those earlier sisters who are really about empowerment. And then you didn't get that much airplay. And then you go to like a Eve who, started bringing a little bit more of the sexuality, but it wasn't until we had those bigger ones who were overly sexual that we hear all this airplay. Become like, we've had people doing the same type of music that the guys are doing for a while, but the women are always in the background. And it's kind of unfair. Like, because I've had conversations with friends and they're like, can you name 3 top female MCs? And it's the top that throws them off. I'm like, no, I can name a whole bunch of female MCs, but they're not at the top of the game. I said, like, well, I guess if that's where you're at in your frame of reference, and if you don't know their music, but if you're a true fan, you'll understand why they should be the top because they can spit bar for bar like some of the other men. So.
Word up.
So you pick it.
When you got the question, so just keep diving
Oh,
into
I
it.
have. I thought you had something too. I got them.
No. Yeah, you got all the questions. You got the list with you.
Okay, so my favorite question that we talked about actually when we did our show live was, all of you alluded to, the female rapper only being looked at a certain way, or we only can be a certain way. So let's get into this over sexualization of the women in hip hop. Is this something that's new, or is this something that's always been there?
I won't say that. Go ahead.
There's also less of a balance now too. But go ahead, Pete.
I wouldn't say it's new, but I wouldn't say it was there from the very start. I think if you look mid 90s is when it became what they say hypersexualized. It became really flamboyant with it. And like Chekesha said earlier, is that I think there's a place for everything. And my problem with today's hip hop is that, like Dan said, there's not enough variety or balance. If you look at Rap City or Pump It Up in the mid 80s, early 90s, if you saw Tribe Called Quest, NWA played right after it, then Brand Nubian, then Too Short. So there was a balance. You gave people a selection. And nowadays it seems that it not just female rap, but rap period, it sounds like the same song is being played all day. And especially like Dan alluded to earlier, is like if you have Cardi B, Meg Thee Stallion, it seems like in order for them to get their foot in the door, they have to have that same sound and sound just like that. But I listen to several female MCs, like I said, I hate that we use that term, but that really can rap. Because being an MC myself, I want to hear someone that can really rap. And I agree, like everybody said earlier, songs have a place. Like if I go to the club, I wouldn't be too upset if there was Meg Thee Stallion or Cardi B playing, because they're club musics for certain clubs. If I go to a bar, like especially a beer bars that I frequent, I want to hear some banging boom bap, because I'm not dancing, I'm just chilling, sipping on my brew. And I just think that there's not enough balance when it comes to female or male artists, especially in today's time. So to answer the question is, no, sexuality is not something that's new in hip hop, but I think that it is over sensualized now.
I remember learning about Millie Jackson's story, and how I didn't know this. I didn't know that the industry was really pushing her to be this raunchy. They was trying to make her like the female version of Rick James, and how she talked about how everybody expected her to be that way, and she didn't want to do that. She just wanted to do music. She just wanted to make good music, and I kind of like pushed her way in the industry. And then you hear a lot of women R&B artists talk about that, how they come into the industry wanting to write good records, good love ballads, also sell records, of course. But a lot of times the industry will say, well, you have to look a particular way, you have to dress a particular way, and you have to write these kind of songs. And so that's, to answer that part of the question, yes, it's always been part of the industry for that to happen. And then I will say a lot of it is self-inflicted, because if you look at, with the exception of Queen Latifah, when you look at the early women artists in hip hop, they came from a crew of males. Even MC Lyte, she came from a crew of her brothers, right? And that really kept, even with Lil' Kim and Foxy Brown, they came from a crew of men. You don't really see women chart on their own in hip hop music until you see Kia with her hit single, My Neck, My Back. Now you see, and she did it by herself. She put that single out by herself. She didn't have no male power behind her. You see the same thing with Cardi B. You see the same thing with the women artists that are out now. They didn't come from a crew that put them on. So back in the day, you had, but with a lot of the men will say, hey, you have to write about these things. So Foxy Brown was writing about drugs because she was around men that told her, hey, you need to write about selling drugs and pushing weight. So so it's kind of like twofold: is the industry and also the men around them. Um, and again, so now what I do like about the women artists now is that they don't need a man behind them to like really put out their music. I think that's dope and that's very empowering. But again, just like Picket Fence and just like Chekesha said earlier, there's no balance, there's no diversity in that kind of sound, and I think that kind of dilutes the culture.
Word.
I agree a whole lot, and I appreciate you, brother, that just gave the quick education on Millie Jackson, because that was one of the points that I was going to bring up, is that there's really not too much new. When Millie Jackson was doing that back in the days, it was, there was a lot of people that was listening to it, but it didn't get as much airplay as a lot of the other music, because the industry, it seems to be controlled, and they tell you the way to navigate it. If you listen to like Little Kim, and she'll tell you about how she started off, and she came out and she wanted to talk about like what her true authentic experience was in the street. So she really did live that drug life, and she really did live that street life, and that's what she wanted to talk about. But Biggie had to kind of sculpt that for her and tell her, listen, being a woman in this industry, this is what sells. They don't want to hear all of that roughneck female type of thing. What's going to sell is sex. And what women have realized is that if you want to get paid in this industry, then you need to start opening up about your sexuality. And it's not to say that there's not some of the women that are already they already have a heightened experience of sexuality, like Cardi B, who talks about openly of her being a part of that stripper culture, and this is a part of her lifestyle now. And when we started to shift over into more of a mentality of embracing that stripper culture, that whole mentality and everything, then you started to see a little bit more women being a little bit more open with their sexuality. Now, whether or not that was all about trying to make sure that they got their voices heard, as opposed to being authentic and true in their expression, time usually tells that after so long and everything. But women being in hip hop, given a true expression, it seems almost, in my humble opinion, as if they're doing what they have to do in order to be successful on many occasions.
Word.
Word. So I have a twofold answer. Yes, I guess the over sexualization has always kind of been there, and it seemed like in the days of Little Kim, it was kind of like a novelty. It was like, ooh, she naked, and now it's like, damn, can you get dressed? Like, it just seems like everybody's naked. And while I think that definitely has a place, we need all facets of women in hip hop being represented. The same as we have, male rappers who talk about, selling drugs, and then we have male rappers who just talk about, just rhyming and MCing, which is fantastic. So when it comes to women, it's like we're not allowed to be lyrical. We're not allowed to spit bars. We can only spit bars if we're talking about, sex or sexing or, being naked or something, to that effect. And I'd be like, why? Like, I went to the Rhapsody show. Me and Jay went on a date. It was probably one of the dopest shows I had been to. And she was fully dressed. Those nails was on point, though. The hair was on point. She looked very feminine, but fully clothed, looking like she just stepped off the block in New York. And so I was able to listen to what she was saying and realize that she was spitting the same kind of stuff that I like to hear when I like hip hop. But yet she is not, your top five. When I say Rhapsody, people are like, who was that? And I'm like, you don't know? Like, where you been? Then I gotta remember, not everybody is married to a rap connoisseur such as myself and a pioneer of hip hop culture. So I get this daily diet of these people that are not on the radio. So I do believe, the Cardi B's and the Megan Stallions have their place. I want some balance though. So like while Little Kim was naked, Doc Rock said Eve wasn't at first. Eve came out the Rough Riders and was like, I can hold my own. And if I had some nuts, I could hold them just like these dudes and be fully clothed. And then a couple years in, then she started to get naked, and I was like, wait, what can we, who's responsible for this? Like, who told you had to get naked in order to make it? And not only that, but like, if you look now, it seems like they can only make it if they're naked. So who's responsible for a woman only being able to make it if she's naked?
Wow.
I blame Dr. Dre for Eve because she was on his label first, and she was called Eve Instruction, and he never put any music out with her. He did the same thing with Rakim. He had Rakim on his label. He never put Rakim on. So I blame. He had like all the dope MCs, Last Emperor, Rakim. He had Eve Destruction, and he never released them. So yeah.
Wow. What? It's insane now, but we live now in a different time where we no longer need to allow a lot of these industries to control the direction and the temperature of how hip hop is being delivered now. And so now, like the times where you needed a label in order to be successful, in order to have your information or your voice heard, now we have this platform called the internet, called YouTube and social media, where we can get a lot of people exposure now. I think now the obligation is ours. The obligation, it has to be ours, and what we are choosing to listen to and what we're reaching for, because now we have access to be able to listen to all of that stuff. We have the dopest MC, my favorite, Sa Rock, who's out there, and she's presenting herself on social media. She's putting herself on all of these platforms and everything. And so she's starting to get her voice heard. Now, is it getting elevated as much? Maybe not. But I think that, in my humble opinion, part of that main reason is because we as a society have kind of bought into the industry's direction on how we need to navigate the talent within the hip hop industry. And so if we stop giving applause to these I'm not going to say offensive, because I'm looking for a better word. If we start giving platform to those lower vibrational type of sounds, and we start to really demand that we get a higher frequency of sound that's being delivered out there, that's what's going to make all of the difference, because now you no longer need all of these deals and everything in order to have your voice heard. And so with all of these sisters that are taking their clothes off, at this point in time, you should be taking your clothes off because you want to, not because you feel like you have to. And it's just a challenging time right now to get us to shift in our mentality so that we can kind of progress and move forward and evolve as a hip hop culture.
I think one thing I've learned, and that hip hop has taught me, is that hip hop is art, right? And it's reflective of the people that produce that art, right? So however we are feeling, Mos Def said it best. If we're smoked out, hip hop's going to be smoked out, right? And it's a reflection of how we interact with one another. And a lot of us men, period, but a lot of us men don't see women as human beings, right? We don't see women as complex beings with feelings and ideas and emotions and theories and concepts, and we just don't. Whether we work in the tech industry, whether we work in the music industry, whether we work in education, wherever we work at, we still don't value women as human beings. So when a woman comes around and wants to talk about how she feels about a particular topic, whether it's domestic violence, we don't want to hear it. We want her to be naked. We want her to be dressed this way. We want her to talk like this, and to serve us. Because really, when women talk about sex, it's really, they still center men around that. They don't really center themselves, because that's the music we want to hear. That's the music we want to consume. So I feel like overall, there's the cure has to be holistic, where from day one we have to see women as human beings instead of as subservient to men. Because again, the music just reflects how we feel about women.
Word.
Yeah, I agree with you. What you said. Now, when I was listening to the other panelists, I was thinking that though we are in a culture where social media, the internet, and so forth is where people are getting their music, we still are going to have at some point in time women in leadership in the industry, because ideally it depends on if you want to be an artist for the culture, or you want to be an artist for profits. And at the end of the day, most artists are looking to be profitable. And so unfortunately, there's going to have to be women in leadership in these A&Rs and in these record labels to, vouch for us. Because, like you said earlier, we had all these women MCs coming from crews of men because those men vouched for them. Biggie vouched for Little Kim. People spoke up for them. So we're going to need a woman in charge in order to speak up for us, because at this point we can stand on our own, but still somebody at the end of the day, unfortunately, is still going to have to vouch for us. Like, a lot of our stuff isn't going to be seen as, oh, she's going to have this long career, because that's kind of what happened to Cardi B. Once she left Love and Hip Hop, they were like, oh, she's going to go the wayside of all the other female artists who start out on Love and Hip Hop. Unfortunately, luckily she was able to, transcend that, and she, her mindset is a little bit different. Her hustle is a little bit different than some of the other women artists who are on Love and Hip Hop. But at the end of the day, people still see her as one of the Migos' husbands. They still don't see her as Cardi B, an individual artist.
That's deep. That's deep. That's real deep.
So
go ahead,
we
Lady.
actually have a viewer question, and it's on the screen. So I'll read it, but anybody can weigh in. So Big T says, how do Cardi and Meg have a place in not just hip hop but the world? And he said we need to wipe and reinstitute ancestral messages. So who wants to take that?
Again, like I stated earlier, hip hop is just a reflection of what's going on, right? So I don't like to use the term stripper culture. Sex work. Sex work is work to me. But I remember a time when I was young where only if you went to the strip club, you was considered immoral, right? You was like, ooh, you go to the strip club, right? And then there was a certain shift where it became something you take somebody on a date to, right? Going to the strip club now is like everybody does it, right? I know people that have birthday parties there with their significant others, and so it's very, now it's the norm to go to strip clubs. Kind of like tattoos, right? There was a time when tattoos was only biker gangs and sailors and people in prison got tattoos. Now everybody gets tattoos, so it's no longer a cultural taboo. That's part of the culture now. So you're gonna see Cardi and Meg talk about that in their music, be about that. When they have interviews, those questions are always brought up, and but it's part of the culture. So they're just reflecting what's going on in the culture now, right? So this, just like there was a time when we were talking, when every hip hop artist had Malcolm X and Martin Luther King in their music, right? Now that was part of the culture. This is now part of the culture, so it comes out. So they're not just, and hip hop culture is global, right? It's part of, they sell everything from Target commercials, you see hip hop in there. You watch it, PBS specials, they have hip hop in there. RZA is doing scores. So it's all part of just the overall, not just the entertainment industry, but everything. It permeates everything. So so that's, I hope that answers the question. That's why, because again, the music is art and it reflects what's going on in the overall culture.
Chekesha, I'm gonna let you take a stab at that question too. Go ahead.
Yeah, so with Cardi B and Meg Thee Stallion, them having a place in hip hop in the world, for me, how I see it is the sign of the times, and us moving into a time that what we call the divine feminine. And divine feminine energy starts to show not just the expression of the female itself, but that creativity, that aspect of creativity. And it's going to show up on both spectrums. And where Meg Thee Stallion and Cardi B, they show up where they show hypersexuality, and that's the space that they're in. And then hopefully we get a balance where there's other individuals that are out there that gives us an opportunity to see women in a different light. I still want to give some congratulatory kudos to Meg and Cardi B for having the courage to be authentic in their expression. Because what we have right now is so many women that are afraid of disappointing people, that are afraid of showing up as their true and authentic self. And so now we have a lot of these movements like the Me Too movement and all of those things that are giving you that indication of how the divine feminine, how the feminine energy is starting to show up and express itself in the world today. We have people also too now like Meg Thee Stallion and Cardi B that's giving their expression of it. Be it as it may, it's still an authentic and then it's an empowering expression. So even if we may not agree with that expression, we're going to talk about energetically the delivery of the expression, the power, the authenticity of them feeling confident enough to be unapologetically and unashamedly themselves. And that's what we need to do. And that's why I was trying to look at this question so that I can try to really understand it. But the ancestral messages is that now we're entering into a phase where it's time for us to shift into that old mentality that women are supposed to be placed in a certain box, a certain category, where the expectation on women is to women that are sexual or women that do things a little bit differently or seen as outcasts, and holding that expectation that women, like the brother was saying, are here just to please men. And that whole song that was put out there, absolutely, it was all about trying to please a man, but then it was also cleverly crafted into a way that shows not only was it about pleasing a man, but I know what it takes to please a man to get what I want. And so they've been taking a lot of the negative connotation of that sexual energy, owning it, harnessing it, and turning it into something that works for them. And so what I can congratulate these sisters on, even if their expression of sexuality might be different from more mature women, we got to remember at the end of the day, these girls are in their early 20s. I don't know. I think Cardi B might be a little bit older, but they're still at a point in their life where they have not realized the power of their sexual energy. And so with that, or the power that it commands, they know that it gets them money. They know that they know on a very basic level the power that it commands, but how it shows up in the 12-year-old girl who's looking to be attractive, who's a little insecure and unsure of herself, and what needs to happen in order to be seen as a desirable woman in this world. That's when the message starts to get a little bit twisted and skewed. We want to congratulate them for being authentic, for being courageous, and for being themselves within that, and being confident enough to present an authentic version of themselves. But they also have to balance that out and be mindful enough to recognize the impact that it's having on society as a whole. They have not reached that point of maturity to really absorb the impact of how their expression shows up on the rest of the world. But Cardi B got a little girl, so let's wait and see.
Word up. Did you want to add to that, Doc Rock?
I was just gonna agree with everything he said, plus add a little bit. So Cardi B does have a little girl, and she's also spoken on how she doesn't allow her daughter to listen to her music. One, because her daughter's like 2. But I think for me as an educator, because I'll take a different spin on where their place is in the world. For me as an educator working with high school girls who have aspirations to do something out, once they get out of high school, their stories are a story of survival. So they're not only, yes, they're hypersexual. And so that's what's getting people's attention. But for a lot of younger girls, it's a story of, okay, I can possibly be a stripper, take some wrong turns, and still achieve my dreams and my goals. And same thing with Megan, though, yes, she is this hypersexualized woman, she also is a college graduate. So, it's helping our young women understand that you can have this duality, that you can be this person that you authentically are, but you also can be educated, you also can be successful. You can also use these things to your advantage, kind of like how she said the women spun the songs for it to be like, okay, yes, I'm going to please this gentleman, but also at the end of the day, I'm going to get what I need. And that's kind of like what a lot of the young girls need to understand, that you can still use these things that people assume are negative to get where you need to get at the end of the day. Like, you can still use those same hustle mindsets to be a strong woman and be an empowered woman in business and so forth. So that's kind of a different take from the ancestral plane and where there are places in hip hop. But for as a society, that's where there are places for a lot of our younger women. They can see them as, though Cardi B doesn't want to be seen as a role model. She said that several times. These young girls they see them as a role model. They see that as something they can strive to. They might not want to be a stripper or a sex worker later on in life, but they do want to be somebody who's powerful and can use their voice to get what they want.
Word up. For me, we said earlier in the part of the episode is that balance. So for me, it's about balance, and like Chekesha and Dan both said, they do have their place, Meg and Cardi, and hip hop and in the world. As far as that ancestral message, I think that you can get that from artists like Cyrock and artists like Star. I think as fans, we need to do more to edify those artists and say that we want to hear these artists more or share their work more. I know in my early stages of hip hop, I didn't want to share what I was listening to. Like, this is my secret. Like, this is for me, and DJs used to cover the labels of the vinyl so you wouldn't know what they were playing. But I think with today's technology and social media and those things, that if you like a different type of hip hop, you have to play your part as a fan, not only to share, but to purchase their merch and music and really let people know about that they depend on you, especially an artist that's independent, that is not on a label, that doesn't have a huge budget or some type of financial investor. They depend on fans who really love their stuff to help push their movement.
And if I could add on with the ancestral message thing, that goes back to what I was saying earlier. Like, that needs to be part of the culture before we even discuss the music. That's something that we're supposed to be doing at home, talking about the ancestors, or pouring libations, whether we do it during Kwanzaa or outside of Kwanzaa. Like, that's something that we need to consistently discuss, because I can't expect anyone not to look for ancestral messages if we're not talking about that before we even turn the music on. You know what I'm saying? So I think, like, again, it goes back, we have to be talking about looking at women as human beings even before we turn the mics on, right? All that comes into play before we come into that. And it should just not be in our homes, but also in our community.
Word up. I agree 100%.
I agree with everything that all of you have said. And as you all were talking, I was wondering in my head, now that Cardi B and Meg Thee Stallion, and we're just, talking about them because they're the most recent, but now that they have become established and we know their names and we know their songs, is it possible at this point that they could shift and get dressed and change what they talk about and still be accepted because they're already in our faces?
I think so. I think that they might lose a few people, but I think as humans, it's our job as we come to the earth to evolve. At some point, we want to become smarter. We want to become a more educated person. And I'm speaking from an individual standpoint, that I want to be, become more spiritually based. I want to become healthier. I think that most humans desire to become better, and you see all these things that say, a better person today than you were yesterday. So I think that, yes, they would lose some people, but I think that they would gain just a new crowd. In some cases, they're going to take the fans that they have, because a lot of their fans are young and they will be growing with them.
I would like to see, and this goes out to the male artists as well, because the male artists don't really do this. A lot of artists in the industry, and again, I get that some people come into the industry for a particular reason. I don't see, and this has been from the beginning, right? I hear this complaint from a lot of young artists. I would like to see more of the established artists mentor newer and younger artists that are doing different things. Every now and then you have a particular artist like Janelle Monáe she'll mentor other artists that were kind of like-minded and put them on. So you see some artists do that where they'll take, but most of the time, I don't see a lot of artists mentoring younger, newer artists or artists that you might want to see, right? So I would like to see them do those kind of things, because they're very influential, right? Not outside of the hip hop community, they're very influential in the world. So I would like, Beyonce kind of does that. Beyonce will promote particular artists, even outside of music. When you look at her last movie that she did for Disney Plus, King, like she promoted a lot of African artists and directors and producers and production designers, and just doing that. And I think I would like to see that more from not just Cardi B, but I would like to see that from across the board with other artists. I would like to see them do the same thing, because that's really how you uplift the consciousness of your community. That's really how you educate people. When Jay-Z produced that movie, he put money into the movie about Fred Hampton, Fred Hampton Sr. And I think we need to see more of that happen, because that's how you educate. That's how you put the ancestral images in there, using your influence and your leverage to bring that up and uplift the community.
Word up.
I agree 100% with what you're saying. And I think that whole each one teach one perspective is going to help us to grow as a community all around, especially within the hip hop community. Because as I was saying with people, even though, like I said, we keep going back to Meg Thee Stallion and Cardi B, but we also have to look at the phases that they are, the phases that they're in life, right? And so with Meg Thee Stallion and Cardi B being in those middle 20s and in that transitional type age period and everything, you're still at a point where you're trying to figure out who you are. And at this point where she's at, she's like, well, I'm very successful, and and people are really encouraging me and the work that I'm doing and everything, and this is what's working, and this is where the success is. But when you bring in some elders to help to give you, not just to sit back and tell you everything that you're doing wrong, but to encourage you and encourage you to kind of move in a direction that's a little bit more elevated, it shows up and it hits a little bit differently. But even if you're spending your time with elders that may even be vibrating on a lower frequency, there's still going to be a lesson in that. Because I can go back into the times where I was in my early to mid 20s and I had friends that were 15 years older than I was. So they were in a different space in life. And having an opportunity to just observe a lot of the patterns that they had in their lives, I was able to learn a lot of valuable lessons within that. So just giving them that opportunity, let's say they wanted to hang out with someone like Master P, for one, who has evolved and matured, and you see how he over the years was in a space mentally at one point, or even Mia X at one point, where they were talking about a lot of the street stuff and a lot of the do or die mentality and a lot of all of that other stuff. And then today, the mentality is a lot different. That comes with maturity. And so those individuals that are open to mentoring those younger artists and helping them to develop, not throw away who they really are. Because like I said, if the sexual energy thing is one of the things that you work well with, then how can you take that and make it into something else? Because our sexual energy is the same energy that's connected to our creativity. And so if we can take that and cultivate it and make it something that's really going to elevate our expression, then that's when we done got ourselves into a sweet spot so that we can really be beneficial in ministering to people and what hip hop is supposed to be doing.
Word up. I like that. Go ahead, Doc Rock. You want to add to that?
I was just gonna agree. But I think it's gonna be a while before they're able to make that transition. Just because hip hop artists, hip hop fans, we're loyalists, and so as soon as people start changing what we are enjoying them for, we tend to fall off unless we are truly dedicated to that person as a fan. Because I think like Jay-Z, he's one of the few artists who's actually transitioned their flows from the street grimy hip hop to a more elevated sound, and people still kind of rock with him because unfortunately, aside from Kanye and his other antics, his music has evolved and people haven't evolved with his music, though he still is very strong as an artist outside of the other aspects of his life. So I think it's going to be a while before they actually make that transition because they're really in that sweet spot right now. And then ideally, especially for at least Cardi B, bare minimum, her goal is to, get her family where they need to be. So she's going to do what she needs to do to keep in that sweet spot. But she also has talked about, diversifying in other areas. So I think at some point Cardi B is eventually going to just kind of wrap it up. She's going to see that, she's had her time. She's diversified her portfolio in other ways because she's trying to be similar to like a Jay-Z and have all these outside ventures that are bringing in revenue. So I think at some point she's going to wrap it up. And so she won't need to have to put her clothes on because by then her time will be kind of done.
So while we're still talking about women in hip hop, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about the violence that we have in hip hop. If you notice, on the male side of hip hop, we just had a rapper get killed just the other day, trying to buy cookies for his mom. Why don't we see that kind of violence on the women's side of hip hop? Because we have underground female artists, we have mainstream female artists. Why is there such a big difference with the violence of the males in hip hop versus females?
I think a lot of that has to do with hypermasculinity, right? That toxic masculinity where our manhood is best displayed in the violence that we mete out, or the violence that we claim that we're going to mete out, and the women that we bed and how much money we make. Like that's part of part of our masculinity, that hypermasculinity. And on the other side of that, the hyperfemininity is considered that hypersexuality, right? So that's why you don't see that in that circle, and you see that on our side a lot. Part of that whole ethos of my gun is bigger than yours, and I'm gonna kill as many people as I can, and you're not gonna catch me slipping. So that's where that comes from, and you don't see that in the women's circle because we expect women to be, once again, hypersexual.
Yeah. I agree with you, definitely. And I also see it as being the expression of the masculine and feminine and the duality in that, right? So when men, they express themselves, they're given a more outward expression. And so it shows up this way where, they're out in the street, they shooting folks, they punching folks in the face and all of that other stuff. And with women, the expression is a little bit different. It's a little bit more passive aggressive. And so when you see those individuals, they go after each other, they're throwing shots at each other on the low. They're writing little songs with little clips in it and everything that's kind of cutting at them a little bit. And you know what I'm saying? And, telling them they dirty and they got the pink eye and all of that other little shit. That's just like jabbing at them a little bit, but not really directly and everything. And that's right there, a true expression of that violence that's within hip hop, but being expressed on two different spectrums, on the masculine and feminine side.
Word up. I'd say you've seen it in female hip hop artists, but not as much. If you look at Remy Ma and a couple others, I just think that far as the men, you have this macho bravado that we have to show our aggression. We have to nobody can belittle me. If somebody tries to belittle me, I have to show them physically that I'm more dominant. So I think that's why you see it more on the male spectrum.
And it's expected from us. It's expected, right? And it's funny because there are times, just like Picket Fence, I listen to the lyrics, and Picket Fence might say, shout out, he might say something, Dan Tres Omi, and somebody else will be like, oh, he's dissing Dan Tres Omi, and then they'll come to me and be like, look, Picket Fence is dissing you, and you're like, nah, he's not really dissing me, he's just shouting me out, and it just like perpetuates that, and we see that part of, unfortunately, another aspect that's part of the culture is this gossip culture where people go onto these shows and they kind of like instigate beefs that are not really there. They really like throw the flame onto the fuel onto the flame in a lot of these situations, and it actually makes it worse. So now I have to answer Picket Fence. I have to answer it because not then I'm a sucker. I'm less than a man. And then when I come at him, he has to answer, and it's kind of like it just perpetuates that cycle of violence.
Word. Or we're coming close to an hour here. Before we get out of here, you know what we got to do. First, we got to give you your self-care assignment for this week, which the self-care assignment for this week is going to be edify a female artist that you love. Whether it be Cardi B, Meg Thee Stallion, Star, Sa Rock, Rhapsody, edify a female artist this week. Now it's time to get into my favorite part of the show. Doom, 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 doom. Brain science, science, science.
All right, so we're talking about men and women and our brains and how we lead and we function differently. So, of course, there's always brain science behind everything that we do. So, different brains, different behaviors, while women lead differently than men. You don't need to be a scientist to recognize that women think, act, and lead differently than men. Yet, science can help us understand why this is so. Understanding the root causes of why women do things differently than men can help us avoid reacting negatively to these differences. When we take time to see that brain wiring is what determines gender-based leadership styles, we can better appreciate what women bring uniquely to the boardroom as well as what men bring. And that could be boardroom or your airwaves. So brain basics. Prior to the early 1990s, they all thought that our brains were the same. And one key point that we've learned from this is while the brain is divided into left and right hemispheres, most of us are dominant on one side or the other. Some of us are primarily left brain thinkers, which makes us more analytical, sequential, logical, and detailed. Others show dominance of their right brain, which is described as more creative, nonlinear, intuitive, and holistic. Can you guess which gender has been shown to have a left brain orientation versus right? Researchers at Yale determined back in the 90s that men's tendencies is to primarily use the left side of their brain, while women generally shift back and forth. We draw on both our left and right sides in practice. So this means that men are more likely to, in fact, have a logical based leadership style, while women are more likely to see the big picture. We have stronger emotions and rely on our intuition for our decision making. So let's take a closer look at how our brains are different. When it comes to communication, which I'm sure all of the men on this panel and all the men watching will surely agree with this next statement. Each day, women speak up to 8,000 words and use as many as 10,000 gestures. Men, on the other hand, use fewer daily words, only up to 4,000, and gestures up to about 3,000. Emotionally, women's brains favor more emotional activity in the midbrain region, while men show more rational activity in the top of their brain. When it comes to task orientation, men generally focus on one task and compartmentalize more brain activity, while women gravitate toward multitasking. Hence why we even have a show about self-care, because we women do it all and we all do it at one time. Attention to details. Women tend to absorb more information through their senses and store more of it in their brain for use at a later date than men do. Therefore, women generally have more interest in details and pay more attention to them than men do. When it comes to stress, men tend to deal with stress much more easily than women, as it is harder for women to shut down their auto stress response. Logic versus language. Men tend to have better logic skills than women, while women exhibit generally better language skills than men. So while it is important to note that both men and women have important skill areas in which they naturally excel, relying primarily on the strength of just one gender as leaders or music artists can result in an imbalance of perspectives and ideas. On the other hand, when men and women work side by side on the leadership and in the boardroom, this diversity of perspectives can lead to more innovative thinking. This better balance in turn can result in greater productivity, improved engagement, higher profits, and a sustainable competitive advantage, and women's voices being heard on the same equal planes as men.
I think balance is the key. It's all about balance, and that explains it perfectly. It also says that we need each other, and shows that we need each other. Very, very dope brain science today. Before we get out of here, I want everybody that's on the panel, let the people know how they can get at you. Let's start with Chekesha. Tell the people how they can get with you.
Yes. Tune in to the Pretty Priestess podcast. I'm on Anchor, Google, Podcast, Spotify, Breaker, and Radio Public. You can always find me there. You can find me at prettypriestess.com. You can send me an email for any products and services that you may see on the site at prettypriestess@icloud.com. Peace.
Dan, tell the people how they could get at you.
You could just Google Dan Tres Omi. It'll come up. Check out my podcast where my killer tape at. And I also have a website, omisbench.com. You can reach me on all those platforms.
Word up. Doc Rock.
I'm just a hip hop head at heart, so I don't really have all of the social media platforms. But I have a unique name, so you can just Google me and find me from there.
So you're just not gonna shout out your fashion blog, or is that peer pressure that'll make you bring it back?
Peer pressure.
What's up with the fashion blog? Let people know.
So I have a makeshift fashion blog that I'm starting. It's called Frugal, Fashionable, and Fly, and you can find it on Instagram. So it's all about finding cute outfits and things on a budget or free.
And I want to give a little pushback, Doc Rock, on the fan thing. You are a participant in hip hop culture, so you're an active participant. We all are, whether we're artists or not. Even before DJ Lady Bounce was a DJ, she was an active participant before she married Picket Fence. So just want to throw that out there. So yeah,
word up.
I appreciate that, because I definitely do a lot of stuff around hip hop, and I visit a lot of things. And I always find that I'm one of the few females there that are there for the music and not for the activities that they could possibly do after the concert. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks for clearing that up, Dan. I was gonna say something, but I was going. Yes, that's one. Like we said, if you are in our generation, which it's a couple different age spans here, but we are all in the hip hop generation. Whether you're X, Y, or whatever they label it as now, this culture is here now, and we're all living in that culture and are a part of it. And if, like Dan said, if you don't have to be an artist, a DJ, or a MC, you're part of hip hop culture because it is here now. It's like all airs all around us, and like Dan said earlier, it's in commercials and movies, TV shows, billboards. It's everywhere you see or looking or hearing is hip hop now. Word up. And as always, you can find the Fly With Us podcast on anywhere you find your favorite podcast. We're also on all social medias like Facebook, IG, Twitter, and now even on TikTok. Please like, share, and subscribe. If you have any comments or concerns, you can also email us at flywithusla@gmail.com. I'm your boy Picket Fence.
I'm your girl, Lady Bounce. But before we get out of here, we got one last comment from the incredible Cooley, the creator, who wanted to know that he missed the part where Lady Bounce talked about Mia X being great. So I didn't really get into it. We kind of talked about Mia X, but I was a huge Mia X fan during the time of No Limit. I was a huge No Limit fan, and to this day, Picket Fence has not let me live down that I was a fan of the.
No, Cooley brought it up, so you gotta. Before we get out of here, go ahead and break it down for him. Break it down for him.
So I was a huge No Limit fan when Picket and I met. I had the gold tank chain.
Oh, wow.
Yes. I had the matching T-shirts. I went to one concert. I was the biggest fan. I thought Mia X was the greatest thing since Little Kim, because I was like, here is this female rapper who was holding her own up against these men, and she was dressed. So with listening to her and Little Kim became my guilty pleasure, where I was able to feed both sides of my hip hop fandom, if you will. But Picket Fence clearly quickly cleared all of that up for me by giving me a whole total introduction into hip hop in itself and female MCs. The first gift he ever gave me was a customized double-sided mixtape, as he gave me a whole hip-hop lesson because he said the music I listened to was trash. But in that day, you could not have told me I wasn't the bomb with my gold tank chain, the charm I had, man, the matching shirt, the chain.
She was a No Limit soldier.
I
Now the funny,
love
the funny thing about this is, at the time that Master P was, they were on the rise. I was living in Detroit at the time, and when we first started hearing them, it's like when I would come back home to Dayton, we started hearing like these songs. I thought it was a joke. I thought it was like, rapping Duke.
Oh,
I didn't know that. I didn't know that it was supposed to be for real. So I was just like thrown off by it, like this dude with the nah, and I thought it was supposed to be like a spoof. So that's what like really threw me off, is I thought the whole thing was like rapping Duke.
Wow.
My bad. Shout out to Master P. My kids love the noodles. Shout out to Master P.
Yes,
And the chips.
Noodles, yeah, the noodles are good. Yes.
Heard up.
Yes, the noodles are good. Yep.
Oh,
Well,
go ahead.
well, that's our time, y'all. Thanks to Dan, Chekesha, and Doc Rock for coming through and continuing this conversation with us during Hip Hop History Month. Please, if you can, join us next week. We'll be talking about the future of hip hop. And I think Dan already quoted the best quote. Most Def said, wherever we're at is where hip hop is going to be. So join us next week at 1 p.m. and we'll be talking about the future of hip hop. It's your boy Picket Fence.
Once again, I'm your girl, Lady Bounce.
We out of here. Peace.
Peace.
Frustrated with traditional education? I was. My name is Michelle Person, and I am a master educator with over 20 years of experience in the field. Rewoke, Rewriting Our Kids' Education podcast is an opportunity for me to share what I have learned with you. Join me each week as we discuss a different aspect of education and find ways to make learning engaging and culturally relevant for our kids. Rewoke is available on all popular podcast platforms.